announcement started. Hopefully I'm in there. Alrighty. So, some announcements of stuff happening. So one, Pancakes and Pontification is our kind of monthly. Yes. Kind of our monthly, because we have these weekly meetings, but we also kind of have a monthly meeting-ish that basically a lot of us like to go out to Denny's first Saturday of the month. We get some pancakes, we get some food, and we just talk about really any theological topic under the sun. It's a place to just bring your hard questions, bring your just curious questions, just anything, and have the group just debate it out. It's a really fun time. We get into some really deep and interesting discussion. So that will be happening this Saturday, September 9th at 6 p.m. And it's at the Denny's on Preston and Plano Parkway in Preston. But the address is right there, 1305 Preston Road. And it's also a Discord announcement has been sent out. Also have our Discord link there if anyone's not on it and wants to join. And also, for anyone interested, after our meeting tonight, we officially end at 8:30, but we will be heading out to, a lot of us will be heading out to Raising Cane's afterward if you would like to join. Also, next week, I know we've been moving around rooms a lot. This is our normal room, but we are not going to be in this room next week. We're going to be in a much larger room next week. It's the SSA Auditorium, and it's like right out there, but it's like multiple levels. So I think the main entrance is on the 3rd floor.
Same building, at least.
Same building, yeah. It's like literally right there, just a floor above. And we are going to be having a very special speaker that week, William Dembski. He's got like 2 PhDs, very knowledgeable. He's from the Discovery Institute. He's published a lot of books. We're very happy to have him, so we hope to see you there. We're hoping to get a big crowd out for that. Again, wide of a much bigger room. So, alrighty, I think I'm going to turn it over to Alan now so we can introduce our speaker tonight.
Yeah, one quick note. So yeah, the topic for next week is intelligent design, and Bill Dembski is one of the pioneers in the field. He wrote a really important book with Cambridge University Press that sort of went into the topic of like, how do you even detect design in nature? And they recently have a 2nd edition out now as well. So I think you guys will really enjoy that. He's also a good communicator, good speaker. Anyway, that's the plan for next week. But for tonight, very glad to have my friend Mauri. How do you say your last name, Mauri? I don't want to butcher it.
Villasenor.
Villasenor. Okay, that's kind of what I guessed, but I didn't want to get it wrong. But I have known Mauri for a number of years, and he came to this group as a student a while back. And I remember Steve Lee was telling me, this guy's like a rock student. It's a rock star, sorry. Those was the words that he used. He's like, he's a rock star. He's got some group that you started, I think, at Starbucks or something, like a Bible study. You should talk about your background, but it didn't come for particularly long, but I think you found the group helpful. So he's going to tell us more about that story. And he's now a pastor at Lake Point. I go to Lake Point Church out in Rockwall, and he's a campus pastor at the Firewell campus, which is a pretty big honor. It's really a great church. If you're looking for a church, I recommend it. You should check it out. It's not that far away. There are some UTD students that go there. And he's the campus pastor at a young age of that church, so that's pretty cool. But he does value apologetics. I also love it when a pastor sees the importance of the intellectual side of Christianity. And so I think we're really privileged to have Mauri come here. He's also a very, very good speaker, so I think you'll find it interesting tonight. So we won't take up too much additional time, but join me in welcoming him up here.
Yo, I'm going to be a little weird. I prepared some notes, and I'm very heavily going to rely on them, so I'm just going to move this over, if that's okay. Man, how is everybody?
Great.
Hot. Good. Hot. I know. It is. I just got back from Colorado where it was 58 degrees. So it's a little different at 106. Just a little bit.
You didn't bring any of that with you?
Oh, I wish I did. Trust me. I wish I did. Man, this is a big deal for me. Like this group, man, Reasonable Faith had a massive impact on me. The trajectory of my career, my life. Man, this group right here, man, did wonders on me. And so, yeah, I'll jump in a little bit into kind of my story, but yeah, just to tell you a little bit about me, I'm young. I'm in my late 20s, and I have a huge honor and privilege of serving at Lake Point. But I never, ever thought that I would be serving in a church as a pastor, and I never thought that I would be attending the church. I had a little bit of a journey, and so, man, just to share a little bit of that journey with you. I grew up in the church. I grew up in the church, but didn't really have a good experience in the church. I grew up in a tradition, and for those of you that are familiar with the church, I grew up in a tradition, just the Presbyterian church. A very liturgical, reformed church with just a very high church view. You know, you have a very particular way of structuring the church. You have a very particular set of theological guidelines and walls, and you don't cross certain walls, certain lines. Unfortunately, growing up, I experienced some pretty nasty stuff. When I was very young, when I was about 8 years old. I'm sorry, I'm digging in deep. I'm going to get really emotional for a second, and then we'll dive into some more relaxed things. But man, when I was 8 years old, I experienced a friend go through some abuse in the church, and it was a church leader. And man, what ended up happening in that church, it just disintegrated. Now, at 8 years old, you don't capture all those details. But it absolutely has an impact on you. We moved on from that church to another church, and man, what I thought was a healthy, thriving church, and it was for a while, another Presbyterian church. What ended up happening was when I was about 12, that church went through a massive church split, and it was all because there were some church leaders that were in disagreement with each other, gossip. Some slander, all this stuff started to spew out, and eventually the church split, and one half went and planted another church, and that half died, and then the half that stayed, which was my family, just ended up going through years of just trouble, and honestly, it was just a mess. And so for me, man, there were some fundamental years, 11, 12, 13, 14, where I was just growing up in this really broken church. And so my mind was forming, my thoughts and my view of the church and faith were being formed. And man, as you can imagine, they weren't really good. The way I viewed the church was, man, I think the church is pretty messed up. And then, not just that, I thought, man, not only is the church really messed up, man, I thought, man, people of faith are really messed up. So I want to dive into that a little bit. I want to kind of use my story as kind of like a guide into a question that we're asking tonight. Man, should faith be reasonable? Like, is that something that should be true? Like, is faith something that should be reasonable? I think something that I wrestled with for a few years, in college. So that's a little bit about my story. I don't know about you. How about you? This is, for me, my experience in reasonable faith is, man, this can be a very diverse group. There's people in the room, maybe for you, you have a faith background, and there's a reason why you came here. Maybe for you, you connect with God with your mind, and that's why you're here. Man, for you, yes, faith is important, but intellect, reason, that right there, that's how you connect with God. And in my experience, also through reasonable faith, there were also some folks that were just curious, people that were seekers, people that somehow met someone else and, man, really just exploring the questions of like, hey, who is God? Man, does he even exist? Man, if he does exist, is he some far out deity, or does he really interact with his creation? Like, man, there's different kinds of people. So for you, man, how about you? What is your experience with faith? Man, whatever that is, hold on to it. And again, I want to use my story as a guide. Man, after that church split, man, I at 12, 13, 14 started asking some pretty big questions. Are church leaders honest? For me, all my church leaders were liars. They were abusers. They were cheaters. They were slanderers. They were gossipers. For me, I had a real big issue with church leaders. And that's where it started for me, the doubt. Then from there, I started asking, man, does God really change people? Because it seems to me, my experience was that people that claimed to believe and to have faith, they weren't different from whom they painted. They seemed to be just as bad as everyone else. Man, for me, my experience of the church was just very different. And I started asking, do church people actually know God, or are they pretending to know God? And then that kind of drew me into a line of thinking where I thought, well, maybe it's not that they're pretending. Maybe it's that God doesn't even exist. Maybe they think he exists, and this is all just a game of pretend. I started asking, like, man, if God really does exist, why does he allow little 8-year-old boys to be raped inside a church? Like, why does that happen? Man, I don't understand. And, man, that took me to a place where I was like, man, either God isn't powerful or he doesn't exist. Like, it is one or the other. And so, man, I just had these questions, and eventually it led me to a place where, man, my Reformed upbringing, man, for those of you that are familiar with that term, man, my Reformed upbringing started bringing up some deeper questions. Man, it wasn't just about morality and God's relationship with our free will, but it had to do with, just the structure of the church. Man, the existence of God. Man, it started going into all these different areas. And so whenever I took my questions to my church leaders that were still there, they would respond with, and I still remember this, I'm sitting in the foyer of our church lobby. Our church is basically dead. Our youth group that was massive now has 3 students, me and my 2 friends, Noah and Andrew, and the 3 of us are just looking around, and we're just talking. We're like, we don't want to be a part of this when we grow up. When we grow up, we want nothing to do with the church. Man, when we grow up, we're not going to pretend that God exists. We're not going to believe in fairy tales. Like those were the conversations we were having. And in one of those, one of our church leaders heard one of these conversations, approached us and said, hey, it sounds like you guys have questions. What questions do you have? And I started to share a few of these questions and that I just shared with you. And I still remember hearing this elder of my church just say, man, you just don't have to think. You just have to believe. Just trust. Just believe, have faith. Y'all, I don't know about you, but that to me was extremely destructive. It pushed me further from the church than I could have imagined. That left in me just a really disgusting feeling. I'm like, man, this guy knew about my family's past, knew about what happened at our previous church. This guy, this elder, was in the middle of church division. He was one of those gossipers and slanderers, and he's just saying, just have faith. Man, I looked at him and I saw nothing but hypocrisy. I saw a liar. I saw fake. I said, I don't want anything to do with this. Man, I was 15, 16, and just a little kid, and I'm like, I stand up to my dad, and I'm like, I'm not going to church. And he said, yes, you are. Okay. And so, man, my buddies and I, we'd just sneak out, and we wouldn't go in. We just hide in a room, and man, we would just start talking about just all the toxicity in the church, all the lies. Now, it didn't get better. It got worse as I grew up. For me, those words, you just have to have faith. Man, they got lodged into my heart and into my mind. And it just kept pushing me further and further and further away. It made me frustrated, angry, and it really just gave me, it grew a deep hatred towards faith and people of faith. And man, I just sat there in a while. I sat there for a while. And I decided, man, they are blind, they are unreasonable, and they may even be stupid. Like that's what I believe. I started to question God's existence, and I got to a place where I was like, man, I really don't care if he exists. And man, I didn't have the language at the time, but reflecting back, I think I was in a place where I was just, I would probably call myself agnostic. I thought, yeah, maybe he exists, probably, but 1, I don't care, and 2, man, if he is, then I don't want anything to do with him. I can't prove that he's there. I can't disprove that he isn't there. I'm just going to live an agnostic life. Now, here's where I want to dig in. there's a fundamental reality. What we experience influences what we believe. What we experience influences what we believe, and what we believe determines what we do. What we do is how we live. And man, how we live, man, really at the foundation, man, there's a question. What are your experiences? If our experiences with the church, faith, religion, God is deception, pride, and gossip, we're going to believe that faith is unreasonable. Ultimately, it's going to lead us to live a life divorced from faith. Now, that was my experience in the church. And when I looked elsewhere, it seemed worse. So around this time I'm growing up, 2002, the Boston Globe conducted an investigation into sexual abuse cases in the Catholic Church, and it just blew up. And if you guys have watched movies recently, in 2015, they made a movie called Spotlight that was all about this case. And man, I remember a few years after this, me and my friends Andrew and Noah, that's what we were talking about. We're like, man, it's not just here, man, it's everywhere. A little bit after that, 2006, a big pastor, some of you may know him, Ted Haggard, a mega church pastor, a church leader in the U.S. Man, he was kind of like a big deal. He had a major moral failure. Man, he was caught not just with some serious drugs, but in a homosexual relationship with a prostitute. And here was this guy who was very much against, anything that was in a heterosexual relationship. Big pastor, leader of the SBC. Man, this guy has a huge moral failing. And it's like, man, okay. And then a few years after that, 2010, this is a little bit more local. About 10 miles from the church I grew up in, another church, a youth pastor was caught having a sexual relationship with one of his students and was caught giving them drugs. Man, that 2002, 2006, 2010, my experiences even before that, man, it was just a mess. Everywhere I looked, faith was a hoax. Everywhere I looked, man, people of faith seemed to be unreasonable. They seemed to just be making up things, man, and it was just different. And for me, it pushed me away. And again, I thought, man, if God really exists, why is his supposed church so messed up? Why are things so broken? And I would ask things like, man, if God exists, where is he? Where was he when this, that, or the other? If God exists, why doesn't he do something about all this? If God exists, why is he silent? Again, further, these experiences further building the belief that God either doesn't exist or he doesn't care. My experiences took me to a dark place. So I walked away from the church. I lived as an agnostic, and I don't know about you, man. This is a big campus, man. What's your experience? What are your experiences, man, that have fueled your beliefs? And how are those beliefs influencing how you live? Maybe it's not you, maybe it's a friend. Maybe for you, it's someone in your class. Maybe for you, it's a family member. But experiences will always influence beliefs, which will determine the way we live. For me, it was like this. So how did I become a pastor? What happened? Man, what in the world? This is my upbringing. What happened? There was something pretty major that happened when I was 17 to 18. Man, I was just very distant. And not to dive too much into it, when I was 17, I was a very depressed kid. And part of it just hormones, being a teenager. Another part was just some things that had happened to our family, at a young age. And I was just very depressed, very anxious. And man, I went through a season where I was just to be a little transparent with you, I was a little suicidal. And so I was contemplating some things. And when I was 17, I had somebody, a friend, who just approached me one day and said, hey, you should come hang out with us. And that friend kind of reeled me into a friend group, and pretty soon I realized, man, these people are different. They're really weird. They were just weird. And they attended church. And I thought that was really weird because they wanted to go to church. Not only that, they had this little Bible study. And I thought that was the weirdest thing, because who would want to waste their time reading an ancient old book with scribblings from dead people? Like, I mean, why would people do that? And then, as I got to know them, I realized, man, I really don't care about what they believe. They just make me feel good. And so I started spending some time with these folks. And then one day, my friend invites me to church. Says, hey, you should come sit with us. So I started attending, and to be honest with you, I didn't pay attention to anything. I didn't care about anything. Honestly, it was like, okay, this is all a big show. There's a lot of flashy lights. This is different from how I grew up. I was very liturgical with a piano and an organ, and it was weird to have flashy lights and stuff. And so for me, I was like, I'm going for the friends. That's why I'm going to church. Now, while I was going, I discovered something. I discovered that what was attractive to me was that, man, my friends seemed to really believe all of this stuff. For them, it wasn't fake. For them, it was different. And so as I started talking about my experiences and explaining like why I believed what I believed, man, they just seemed to have very different beliefs. And I noticed that the reason they had different beliefs is because their experience was so different. And so that made me angry. I was like, man, if only you knew. If only you would have gone through what I went through, you would know the reality. Like, man, I didn't have the language, but now I'd have the language of like, if only you were to peek behind the curtain of like a believer's life, you would know, man, that it's all just hypocrisy, lies, and gossip. There is no God. Man, and if there is a God, he doesn't care. But as I talked with these friends, there was something inside that I was like, man, okay, they really believe what they say they believe. Man, they've experienced something totally different. So I kept coming back, and and eventually I started meeting some adults, and I started meeting some leaders. And man, in this journey of just meeting some adults, I met a guy named Greg. And man, Greg was at one of our other campuses, and man, he really believed. Man, not only did he believe, he was one of the pastors there. Man, and got to know him, started spending some time with him, got to meet a couple of the other guys there, and man, I really started going back to these questions that I had. I thought, man, what if I'm wrong? What if my beliefs are just wrong? What if I experienced, man, yes, I had some crappy experiences, but what if those experiences, misinformed and misdirected my beliefs? Like, what if I'm wrong? So I started going back and asking, like, well, okay, well, why? Why? And then one night, again, I'm contemplating, I'm very, very depressed kid, very anxious kid. One night, I go to church, and this was probably the most depressed night that I had as a 17-year-old kid. I'd gotten into some stuff with my family. We had a pretty major event happen in our family, and so I kind of ran away from home. And when I ran away from home, I had nowhere to go. It was a Sunday night, and there was church. And so I was like, I don't care about church, but I need to be around those friends because they make me feel good. So I ran there. I ran to my friends, and man, I didn't hear anything the pastor said. I didn't hear anything about work. Didn't care. But I was there with my friends, and I just wanted to talk to my friends. And after the whole service, I went up to one of my friends and I said, hey, can we talk? And my friend just basically just did this and said, hey, just give me a minute. And I overheard what my friend was saying to someone else. Like, it was another friend that they had invited. They're just telling him about Jesus and the church and all that. And it made me so angry. I was like, oh my gosh. Like, here you are, like, battling these, ridiculous things. And here I am, depressed and anxious, thinking about suicide. I need to talk to somebody. And nobody wants to talk. So I just ran away. I was so angry. I got in my truck and I just started driving. I drove for about 2-3 hours, right? Outside of Dallas. I have no idea where I'm going. I'm just driving. And deep down inside, all these questions that I had been wrestling with, man, it brings me back to the church that I grew up in, to the brokenness, to the leadership, to to all that division. And it took me back to what happened when I was 8. Man, I started replaying like all those memories with my parents, those conversations with my friend, like everything that had happened. And I was just so angry and upset. Man, I started thinking about what happened with my parents. And I got to a place where I was like, man, I think I'm gonna hurt myself. And so I'm sitting there in my truck, and man, I'm just driving. I see this curb, and I'm like, man, I'm gonna flip this thing. And so I put my hand on the steering wheel, and I just floor it. And I'm crying. I'm angry. I'm crying out at God at this point, and I'm just saying, man, God, if you're there, I hate you. I really hate you, because you've been nothing but evil. You've been nothing but malicious. You've done this, and this to my family. You've done this and this to my friend. You did this, and this at that church. I just started like crying, like, man, just telling him all these things that I said, man, God, you've done these things. If you're there, if you can even hear me, this is who you are. You are an evil God. You are a bad God. I want nothing to do with you. And in getting all that out, I got to a place where I was so broken and emotional that I asked a question. I said, where have you been? And man, and this is all in the matter of seconds, like in a flash of lightning. Man, this is a little crazy, but definitely not. This is going to sound unreasonable, but let me. I'll explain. And I had a moment where I heard in my truck, I heard voices, like audibly, like I heard voices of my friends saying, "Why are you running? Man, what? God loves you. Man, He didn't do those things to you. He hates that happened. Man, He hates that this happened to your family. Man, just because those things happened and those leaders did those things, like, man, I started hearing conversations that I had with friends months before. And man, man, it was in a flash, man, just in a second, in a blink of an eye, I hit the brakes, I pulled over to a gas station, and man, I was like, man, I just asked a question and I heard all these things. I'm like, man, I'm not superstitious or anything. I didn't have the language, but I was like, man, I think God just answered. Like, I think He just spoke to me. And so I, in a moment there, I was so overwhelmed, man, I was just crying. I said, God, if you're there, I think you are, I need you. There was a turning point there. Now, and that turning point was, man, I was curious and I wanted more. So I started talking with some of these guys that I had met. At this point, we ended up moving to another campus, the campus that we're at now. I met Steve Lee, and man, when I met Steve, I had a billion questions. And at this point, I had decided to follow Jesus. I didn't have all the answers, but I had a ton of questions. And so I started asking Steve questions. I'd come up to him. I'd have like a list of questions, and Steve never had answers. He never did. He just had books, and he'd say, "That's a great question. Here's a book. Go read it." And, and yes, those 10 questions were answered, but then I had 20 more. And so I'd come back and I'd ask Steve more questions, and then he'd give me another book. He'd give me a podcast. He'd invite me to to Reasonable Faith. He would invite me to a debate or something. There was always something. And I started finding people that, not just Steve, but I met another guy named Brian, man, also part of our church. And he eventually also became kind of like a mentor. And I'd bring him questions, and again, he didn't have answers. It was just, man, here's some books, here's some things to think through. And what I realized was, man, faith was unreasonable because for a while I was ignoring evidence. Man, there was evidence that was right in front of me. Man, I was going to church for a while. I was having conversations with people. Man, I would share my experiences and my beliefs, and they would respond with evidence of why my beliefs were wrong. And I ignored them. And so, man, faith for me was unreasonable because I ignored some evidence. And so at this turning point where I realized, man, I think I'm curious. Man, I think I want to find out more. And as I started to read and go to debates and come to Reasonable Faith, and as I started to like really question, like, man, what do I believe and why do I believe it? Like, I want to deconstruct what I believe, what I think I believe, and I want to start from the beginning. Like, let me try to figure out like what has led me to this point. Man, when I started doing that, that started changing everything. My in those agnostic years, I ignored evidence, but in the years that followed, man, I chased after evidence. Man, the second I caught a glimpse or I sniffed a little bit of something that could potentially be a new idea, something that I hadn't thought about, man, I just obsessed over it. Man, I remember, man, the first time I heard the Kalam cosmological argument, something so simple, but to me, it blew my mind. I was like, that's insane. Oh my gosh, God obviously exists. You know, how stupid could I have been? You know, and then I started, man, really for me, like deep down in my soul, some of the deepest, darkest crevices of my soul, the biggest questions I had to do with morality, man, had to do with like the character of God. And so as I started questioning, like, man, what is the relationship between, you know, God's, you know, his power, who he is, his characteristics, and my like free will? Like, man, I really, really wrestled with that. And I think most of us in here still do. But man, for us, like, man, for me, I was really wrestling with a lot of these questions. And anytime I caught a glimpse of something new, man, I obsessed over it and I needed to know. I was on a journey to pursue the evidence. Man, I was done with ignoring it, and I wanted to chase after it. So anytime there was new evidence, I wanted to know what that evidence was. Man, I was obsessed with trying to figure out what was true. Man, when I was about 22, man, this quote right here, man, really, really, really hit home. This is a leader in the church, really, really old church. A guy named Augustine of Hippo. He said, faith is the first step in understanding, and understanding is the reward of faith. And let me read that one more time. Faith is the first step in understanding, and understanding is the reward of faith. And I was so against faith because of my experiences. But I hit a point where I realized, man, faith really is a doorway to understand. Man, faith and reason are not at odds with each other, but they're interconnected. And when I first discovered that, man, for me, man, I felt like I saw a beautiful new mountain for the first time. I was just obsessed. I needed to see more. Man, I met guys like Steve, Alan, discovered guys like William Lane Craig, Frank Turek, Greg Kukul, so many other guys. And man, I just started consuming content. And I discovered the discipline of apologetics. And just by show of hands, who's been here for a while? Like, who's been here a while? Who's new? That's awesome. Man, that's a good group of who's new. Man, I don't know about you, but when I discovered the discipline of apologetics, which is simply this, like, man, if you're not familiar with apologetics is not apologizing. It is, which everybody here knows. That's like an old joke. Everybody says, yeah. But it's not the art of apologizing, but it's the art of making a defense. A defense of what? Man, a defense of Christian doctrine, Christian beliefs, the existence of God. Man, of faith. Man, the reason is interwoven with faith. And so apologetics is huge. When I discovered it, I was like, man, I want more. But not just that. In my discovery of apologetics, I discovered apprenticeship. Man, just by the room, when you hear the word apprenticeship, what do you think of? What is an apprentice?
Someone studying under a person who was an expert practitioner of a particular thing to become themselves an expert of that thing.
That's exactly right. That's what an apprentice is. In fact, in some ways, like university, like, man, you're apprenticing under a professor. Man, you are learning from a master, and you are becoming a master yourself in that particular field. Man, I discovered apprenticeship in apologetics. Like, man, learning from guys like Alan and Steve, and man, from a distance, reading Craig and Turek and those guys. Man, for me, I was like, man, I really saw myself as a student, and they were the master. And so for me, when I approached a book or I approached a guy with questions, for me it was, man, I'm the student, they're the master. Like, man, there was a turning in my heart. Rather than me going, I know it all because of my experiences and my beliefs, I kind of erased everything. I said, I know nothing, but they do. So I'm gonna ask them questions. I'm gonna continue to come. I'm gonna continue to bring my questions. And so for me, apprenticeship, man, was walking closely, shadowing, reading, asking, consuming, practicing what my what my masters were sharing. That's a weird way of saying it, Steve. You're my master. But
You're my Padawan.
oh, oh man, Ahsoka. Anybody watching Ahsoka?
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, I only saw the first two. I've been out of town, so are they bad?
They get a little better.
Okay, good. I kind of gave up. I was like, I don't know if I want to watch it.
Yeah.
Man, but yeah, I don't know about you. I don't know you, but how many of you come regularly? Like you come at least 3 times, 3 times in a month. Okay, that's awesome. Great, man. Let me encourage you, man. Whatever your reason is for coming, keep coming back. Like dig into that. Like, what's the reason? Why are you here, man? Is it that you're a believer and you're just curious and you connect with God with your mind? Or for you, are you a seeker? Like, man, for you, like me, you're like, I don't know, my experience tell me something totally different. And there's something that's attractive about using my mind. Like, why are you here? If you are here, man, let me just encourage you, lean in. Like, lean all the way in. Like, don't just come. Man, if someone comes up and is like, hey, read this book, read it. Man, if someone gives you a new name that you don't know who this guy is, man, like, do a little research, Google that person. Man, order a book on Amazon, listen to a podcast. Man, like, dig in, become hungry, become a student of the master. Like, whoever comes and teaches, guys, like, these guys are awesome. Like, not me. I don't have a PhD, but I'm young. But man, these guys that come in, y'all, they're masters. Like, man, stay afterwards. Ask them questions. Build relationships with them. Keep coming back. Man, be curious. Be curious, because evidence influences your beliefs, which will determine the way you live your life. And so if you're here and you're just curious about the way others are living their life, if you're curious about the way people walk and talk, man, if you want what they have, keep coming back. Keep coming back. Not only did I discover apprenticeship, man, let me get a little deeper. I discovered freedom. Man, I shared a little bit of kind of like my background, what I was going through, what I was holding on to. In a lot of ways, I was holding on to a lot of pain of my past. And man, for me, the pursuit of evidence transformed my beliefs because it gave me new experiences. Man, the pursuit of evidence changes everything. And so if you look at, man, reasonable faith, if you look at apologetics as the pursuit of evidence, man, it will absolutely transform the way you view faith. 100%. 100% guaranteed. For me, that's what it was true. One of my pet peeves is when in the church, well-meaning pastors or leaders say, you can't come to faith through apologetics. Biggest load of baloney. Because, man, it's just not true. Like, I know what they mean. I know what they mean. Like, hey, God's the one that he's the one that does the work. I'm like, yes, of course. But, man, he uses reason. Man, yes, he uses reason. Man, reason and faith together. For me, I found freedom from these questions that were holding me captive. Man, I don't know about you, but man, do you want freedom? Like, what's the reason that you're here? Man, not just that. Let me speak to you. For those of you that have been coming for a while and you consider yourself to be a believer, look at the size of this room. And this is a good sized room. But now look at the size of this university campus. Man, I don't know if you've taken some time to just walk around this campus. There's a lot of lost people. There's a lot of lost people that I guarantee it. Who knows how many, but there's absolutely people out there that, like me, anxious, depressed, angry with the church. what are you doing about it? What are you doing about it? There's a reason God gave you the mind that you have. There's a reason you connect with God in that way. It's a gift. What are you doing with that gift? Man, you are learning some incredible, you're building your tool belt, man, of just incredible just tools. Man, arguments, man, just stories, man, just evidence. Man, how amazing would it be if what you gather doesn't stay in this room, but it left the walls of this room? Man, there's a world out there. Man, there's a world out there of men, women, students, professors, man, that are aching to know this God. And guess what? They have questions that you have the answers to. And how cool would it be if, man, what you have, the freedom that you have found, man, you're able to help others discover that same freedom. Man, the last thing that I discovered, which I think is a no-brainer, is man, I discovered a healthy church. Man, I don't know if you noticed, but all these things, man, like apprenticeship, freedom, like all these things came through a healthy church. Man, if I can be real, I don't know about you, those of you that raise your hand, you're here, you're curious, maybe you don't have a church background. Maybe for you, you have friends, or maybe people out there that had an experience like me. Man, there are a lot of unhealthy churches, but there are a lot more healthy churches. And sadly, what happens is the negative gets highlighted and the positive gets swept under the rug. The beautiful thing, though, is, man, this is a room full of, man, of healthy believers. And this is, a lot of you are. Man, and a lot of you have, man, you have positive experiences where, man, you have discovered God, and you use your mind to connect with God. And how cool would it be if you found somebody that, man, just didn't connect for whatever reason, felt that faith is at odds with reason, and there's no reason to pursue a God. And either he doesn't exist, or if he does exist, they don't want anything to do with him. Like, how cool would it be if you were able to introduce someone like that into like a healthy family? Like this right here, this could be a first step, and maybe it has been for some of you. This could be a first step into one day being part of a church. And maybe you've got a friend or somebody, man, that would never walk into a church, but they'd come into something like this because they've got questions. Man, what are you doing with what you have? Man, faith, there was a question that I asked at the beginning, should faith be reasonable? And I think the answer to that question, I'll tell you right now, the answer to that question is absolutely. Faith that is unreasonable, man, to be, this might be a little controversial, but I think, man, faith that is unreasonable is skewed. Man, there's something that happened. There's something that's wrong there. There's some experiences that influence some beliefs that determined how that person is living their life. And so, man, should faith be reasonable? Absolutely. Why? Because God is creator. He is sustainer. He created something out of nothing. And everything that we perceive in this world, including reason, God is the creator of reason. And if God is the creator of reason, should faith be reasonable? Absolutely. Because God is the God of faith and reason. So I wanna leave it. I'm very short. This is very short, but I want to leave you guys with two things. Man, one, if you are a seeker, you're someone who's exploring, you're looking, man, there's different reasons for, or not reasons, motivations. Man, there are some seekers that had some emotional experience, and they cover up that emotional experience with intellectual objections. They say God doesn't exist because of X, Y, and Z, and they're confronted with the evidence and they ignore them. Why? Because it was never a matter of intellect, but it was a matter of emotion. That's the majority of people that reject God. It's an emotional reason. Something happened, like me, where, man, we want nothing to do with him because something happened, and we'll cover it up. We'll justify it. But then there are others who have legitimate intellectual objections. Man, like legitimate questions. Man, well, how can it? How can something come out of nothing? Man, how was the first cause caused? Man, there's legitimate questions that you can ask. So if you're a seeker, man, let me just say this. If there's an emotional reason, be honest. Man, be honest. Don't cover it up. Man, just be honest. Because no amount of evidence will ever be able to convince you. You've got to deal with the emotion. But for those of you in the room, maybe for you it is an intellectual reason. Man, you've got legitimate questions. Man, let me read something to you. This is actually, I don't have it here. Never mind. I'm going to quote it to you from memory, so I'm going to butcher it. But there is a promise from God. If God really does exist, and if he really is creator, and if he really is, who he says he is. When he says this, it means it's true. And he says if you search for him with all you've got, you will find him. And that's a promise. And so if you are a seeker and you have like legitimate questions, man, if you're a reasonable man or woman, and you're like, man, he could, or no, he couldn't. If he could, man, seek him as if he did exist. And if at the end of the road you get there and you're like, man, he's not actually there, you don't lose anything. But if you get there and he's actually there, man, it was worth it. But if you're a believer, let me speak to the believer. Man, connect faith with reason. Man, most of you are doing that. That's why you're here. Man, have good questions. Like, ask good questions. I don't know about you, but for me, I have a little note. Like, I'm crazy about my notes, and very particular, very OCD about my notes. But I experimented with Evernote, Apple Notes. I forgot the other one. All these other note-taking apps, and Apple Notes is the best. So, here's what I do. I actually have an entire set of folders that's just called Tank. It's my tank. So I'm constantly consuming content. I'm reading books, articles, podcasts, conversations with people. If I have questions, I'll throw them in there. This is my tank. If I come across something that I just don't understand, man, I write it down, and then I'm like setting up meetings with people. I'm like, hey, do you have some time? Or hey, I'm going through and I'm on Amazon looking for books, ordering stuff. Man, I encourage you as a believer, like don't just live in your boxes where you're like, I'm living in my faith box, and then I'm living in my reason box when I come on Thursdays. Like, man, they're connected. Man, ask questions. Ask questions on Sundays, on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. Ask questions, and when you come here, come prepared. Man, come to your leaders and ask, like, hey, man, I'm wrestling with this. Man, what can you give me? Don't just come and listen to a lecture and then leave. Man, like, come hungry. Come dripping with questions. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 is something that if you've been coming for a while, you know this passage. Man, this is speaking to the believer. Always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, and do it with gentleness and respect. Man, you've got a campus. If someone finds out that you come here and they ask, well, why are you a believer? Are you able to give a reason? Man, what are you doing with what you're learning? What are you doing with what you're reading? What are you doing with the evidence that you've discovered? Man, take it and use it. Man, you have a responsibility as a believer, man, to give an account, a reason for the hope that is in you. Not just to say, well, I just have faith, just believe, and you just, just go do that. Oh, I believe because I believe. Leave me alone, No. We are meant to have a reason for what we believe. Man, to tie all this back to my experience, man, I don't hate anybody for it. I don't have any, I don't have any hate for anybody. But my church leaders, were ill-equipped. They were not trained. And there were a lot of heavy things that happened to our church growing up. And they were just overwhelmed. And so when a 15, 16-year-old kid comes and says, hey, why do we believe this? Hey, why did this happen? Why did God do this? When that leader just responded with, just have faith, that pushed me away. Don't do that. Don't do it. Because for you, it may not seem like anything. But for someone else, it might be eternity. Like, man, don't push people away. Have a reason. Know the reason. And for you, know what you believe and why you believe it, so that when someone asks, you're able to give an account. Oh, that's all I got. Thank you.
Should we do a couple of quick questions? Anybody have
Yeah.
since you emphasize that, especially asking questions? Ashton has one there.
Have you had the opportunity to mentor or pastor someone at your church who is in a similar position that you were in, who had questions, like another young person?
Yeah, actually, so great question. The apologetics for me is kind of what got me, I mean, I had just become a believer, and it's what got me excited about faith. And so I kind of have a special place in my heart for guys, especially guys, that are wrestling with deep questions, with apologetics. And so, man, for me, I have something with our church staff. I say, hey, if there's anybody here that has any kind of apologetic question, you send them to me. So for me, it's coffees, lunches, that kind of thing. Also, over the years, I didn't mention this, but kind of in my journey of discovering here at Reasonable Faith, man, I didn't come a whole lot because I was never a student here. I was a student at another school. I would drive from Arlington to here because I wanted to be part of this group.
That's a long way.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a drive, but it was awesome. And so around that time, man, I'd come here, and what I learned, I would then take back. I started a Bible study with my friend, and we found a place, and we started at Collin College because we had a buddy that was going there, and he was like, I want to do a Bible study. And so there was the three of us. The 3 grew to 5, grew to 15, grew to 30. We grew that thing to like 50 people, and so we would go through books of the Bible. But my favorite part was when we would go through like apologetic books. So we went through like On Guard. We went through Tactics by Greg Kukul. We went through I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Frank Turek. And so those were my favorite like times. Was like, okay, some of these guys have questions. All right, we're gonna take a break from going through Matthew. Whoever wants to come, let's get together and we're gonna go through Frank Turek's book. You know, it was fun. Yeah, great question. Yes, sir.
Howard, was it Noah and who was your other?
Noah and Andrew.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Noah's what happened with them?
How are they now? Yeah.
Yeah. So Noah's an atheist. Andrew's a Baptist.
So do they say?
Yeah. Man, it's funny because all three of us ended up. We all walked away for a little bit, and Noah really, man, his parents didn't really have parents, and so he really did walk away. But all three of us, we were either agnostic or atheist, and then Andrew, after I came to faith, I got a text message from him, and he said, "Man, I found these guys. They're really weird. It's called the BSM." And so he later came to faith, and he's now a believer. He's about to get married, and so it's cool. Yeah, great question.
Still have time for your other friend though.
Yeah. We pray for him, and more importantly, I think for him, we've learned that his objections, he says they're intellectual, they're emotional. We all have the same experiences, and so we know.
But that is a lot to work through. But yeah, hopefully you can do that through you guys.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite? You mentioned the Kalam. You thought it was like a pretty powerful argument. Do you have any others that kind of got your attention, maybe early on when you're trying to deepen your faith?
I think the two big ones for me were the Kalam. It's just so simple, and for me, it was mind blowing. I think for me, the book that did it was probably, as simple as it is, it was Frank Turek's book and how he laid out, what was it? Oh man, what was the acronym? Surge.
Yes.
Man, oh, that blew me away, and I thought that was the coolest thing. I was like, man,
Nice.
this is
Yeah.
awesome. That, and then the moral argument. Yeah, just because of my
Great.
questions about God.
What does that stand for, that acronym?
Surge.
Yeah.
Oh man, let's see if I can remember. So there's S, which is, help me with the S. Does anybody know?
Galaxy seeds,
Galaxy seeds. U,
expanding universe,
expanding universe. R,
relativity.
yes.
G is
G,
galaxy seeds.
no, galaxy seeds. What was
What is
that?
this?
Second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
Second law of
Second law.
thermodynamics. That's what it was. Yeah. And then E was
He was probably the expanding
That was
universe.
Expanding
Well,
universe.
What would you be?
Well, I'm
then?
just misleading you. Why did you ever?
Okay,
You never had any answers.
You had books though.
man, bad experiences, bad beliefs. Man.
Galaxy seeds.
What is it,
Wait,
Rob?
what is you?
Okay, it is second law, universe is expanding, remnant heat, galaxy seeds, Einstein's general relativity.
Einstein. Yeah, that's what it
Okay,
was.
so you were right about you. So.
So this was this was the just the evidence behind the universe. Man, remind me how the chapter is laid out.
That's all evidence for the beginning of the universe.
The beginning of the universe. Yeah. So it was just mind blowing to me. I was like, man,
Seth
first
did give
time
a talk week one on that, a shortened version
Yeah.
on the Kalam. So most people here heard that recently. So
That's
pretty
awesome.
cool. And we are going to do a moral argument talk later in the semester. But yeah, that's
awesome.
really important one as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your opinion. You said after you heard the Kalam argument, you're convinced that God exists. So my question is, at what point do you not need faith anymore, where you can just know when you have all the right information that God exists?
At what point do you just know? Well, okay, let me back up.
Do you still need faith if you become convinced? Is that sort of the question?
Well, can you get to a point where you don't need faith anymore?
Man, I wish.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man,
I mean, the Bible contrasts faith with sight, right? And so you don't really see God. So in that sense, you always need faith.
yeah, so, faith is, man, actually Steve taught me this. Man, faith, how did you say it? Faith, believing without seeing. That's, it's kind of deceptive to look at faith that way. Man, faith is more than that. Man, faith is trust. Man, you can trust in something and not fully understand it. And to give you an example, like, I'm not a mechanical engineer, but I can trust that I can sit in that chair. Like, man, I have faith in that chair. Man, will I ever not need faith? Like, I mean, honestly, like, this makes sense. Like, I could sit here and one of the nuts or the screws could, like, screw up and I could fall, So on some level, even sitting in that chair, like, there's still a little bit of faith in my mind. Yes.
Got to make another comparison. I've never seen a subatomic particle. I've never seen a proton or neutron or something on its own, but I have faith that the people who know things about them have proven they exist.
You believe your textbooks, yeah.
The apostles saw Jesus, they saw his miracles, they saw him risen from the dead, they saw him ascend. They still need faith because they still need faith that that God's going to hold his promises, that he saves us from our sin, and that Christ is going to return.
Yeah, that's good.
To some extent, you even need faith to just trust your senses.
Yeah.
Like, how do I know that? Like, how do I know how do I know that the person who's standing up there is real? Well, I have faith that my senses are, trustworthy.
I'm gonna jump in. Y'all all have totally screwed up the definition of faith.
Oh!
All right, you're all wrong. Here's the definition of faith. Trusting in that which you have good reason to believe is true. That's what faith is. So it's not how much do you know that you don't need faith. That's, again, faith and reason being opposed to one another. Faith is actually acting on that which you know to be true. For example, you gave the example of the chair, you know it's gonna hold you up, and you have good reason to believe it holds you up because you're seeing people sit in it, it was constructed, and if you have no reason to the contrary, it's rational for you to trust that it will hold you up. And then when you actually trust in it, you actually sit down in it, that's what faith is. Faith is not belief. Those are two different things, right? Faith is trust. And you trust those things, you have good reason to believe is true. For example, I have faith in my wife, that she's not cheating on me, right? Maybe she is, I don't know. I mean, I was her, but I have faith in her because it means I trust her because I have good reason to believe it's true that she's not going to cheat on me and talk bad about me. It would be sort of stupid if she's cheating on me, spending all my money, which is very little because I'm a high school teacher, and like that would not be faith. That's called stupidity, if I continue to trust her. So faith is trusting in that which you have good reason to believe is true. So like the Bible says the demons believe. Well, what don't they have? They don't have faith because they're not trusting in that which they already know to be true. And that's what faith is trusting in those things that you know to be true. And of course, then now we're into apologetics. How do you know something to be true? You have to justify it. You got to give reasons, evidence, and the like.
And that's the master. Yeah.
That is more biblical definition, that's good.
Slightly different picture to what Steve said. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen for people's home. So I would say it's slightly different. That is, we have evidence that many things in the Bible are true. There are other things for which there can never be evidence. And we extrapolate from all the things we can validate are true. Therefore, the things we can't know, like being saved from sin eternally in heaven, whatever the eternal life is, we trust that it's there. We cannot validate that, but based on what we know that we can validate, we know the source is accurate, and so we put faith, as Steve said, into the rest based on what we know. That's just another slightly different way to color it.
I think a good analogy to this would be in mathematics, right? In mathematics, you can prove a theorem concerning a number that is too large to possibly have an instantiation in this universe. and yet you can prove that stuff about this number is true or false based on, just logic and reason. But since you can't actually get that amount of things in this universe and see if it holds with physical objects, ultimately you are trusting that these statements are true about that number on the basis of faith, I guess.
And I think when you talk about reasonable faith, you have to put the two together. You can have all the reasons in the world, but until you get to the faith part where you're taking action upon those reasons, they're just reasons and they don't mean anything. And what you run into with a lot of people that are struggling with it and fighting it, life sometimes like it is an emotional thing, they've got something in their core. You can give them all the reasons in the world, but at some point they've got to get past whatever the emotional roadblock is to let themselves step out on the faith. You can study a bridge, you can learn everything about it, every little detail about it, down to, subatomic levels, whatever you want to do, but you've got to step out onto it to trust you to carry it across the river. And if you never do, you don't. And you get people, when you're trying to deal with them sometimes, that they will go to great lengths to avoid taking that step. And they'll even tell you, yeah, I know that's right, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find some other way around it. I'm going to find some other way to live my life that keeps me from lets me avoid having to ever make that step. And that to me, I think is the big trick, is you can present all the reasons in the world. How do you get to that person to actually realize, okay, you need to act on this?
That's good.
Thanks for sharing your story. I didn't know a lot of those details. That was amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. This is fun.
Awesome. Very motivational. All right, so yeah, whoever can come to Canes to join us for some great discussion, be great.
Yeah. What time is that?
It's a little bit early, but that's good.
8:20? All right.
If you are hungry and have questions, come to Canes.
Exactly.
If you have questions or you're hungry, either way.
And if you're hungrier and have more questions, come to Pancakes and Pontification on Saturday.
So you guys did. Understand, yeah, you've been out of town.
Okay.
I saw you played 14 games. It's funny enough, I kept on